Dat Nation, welcome as we prepare for the final preseason game of the 2023 year. And hopefully that's a good thing for you. You're excited about it. You're looking forward to it. Welcome in, everybody. I'm glad that you're here. It has been a busy week. We do start to figure out what film study that we're dropping tomorrow. I've been in my head. Do I talk about Jake Hayner? Although I think that he's going to get some really good reps this week. Do I do Derek Carr, who we've gotten seen time of? Still got to figure out what I'm going to do for my film study tomorrow. But hopefully you've joined if you've been watching the YouTube channel. We've put out Jalen Smith. We've taken a look at Isaiah. We've taken a look at Peyton Turner. So we've definitely put out a lot of film over the past 2 weeks. And I really do hope that everybody who listens to the podcast is enjoying it. And even hopefully that is encouraging more people to not only listen to the podcast, but check out the YouTube channel where we're putting all of this content out there, as well as on our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and of course, our Discord, where our loyal listeners all gather to have fun, hang out, and every now and then troll themselves. So it's good to see. And that also reminds me, I got to actually respond to Elias. Elias reached out talking about maybe coming on the show sometimes this year. I need to respond to him and maybe get him in on some of the after game shows. I know with my schedule with work, it is difficult to, kind of have our consistent time. Like tonight, I'm actually recording the live episode of Who Dat Confessional a little bit later than normal. And that's just because of everything that's going on. But still at the same time excited and can't wait to spend the entire season with you. And Lester already coming through says do a Saunders film study or DeMarco. I will say that I've kind of done Saunders already. In fact, I did do a Saunders one last week, but at the same time, that doesn't mean we can't do more. And I'm having a fantastic time going through film again. And I'll be honest, it's nice because I'm kind of knocking the rust off a little bit. And not to say that I haven't been interested in football, but I mean, I haven't really gone through the level of detail needed to, in my opinion, properly evaluate football. And I'm doing that again this year. And I would even say that last year I didn't do it to the degree that I am this year. And curious to see what, regulars of the show think, how I'm doing so far this year and getting in the swing of it. It's like any skill. When you don't use it enough, you start to lose it, right? And I would say that I don't think I've gotten bad or anything. And I just think that, it's been a while since I've had this level of dedication to it. And I even went back and looked. I looked last year. And I'm going to give a shout out to everybody who's here. Welcome in. This just kind of turned into a discussion session. But I went back last year and in all of December, I put out 2 film studies. In all of November, I put out 5, the entirety of November. And that was probably my most active month. And in October, my birthday month, everything, I think I put out 4. So as a whole, well, actually less than that, because if you go back, that's, I'm trying to do this live. I think I actually haven't done that level of consistent film study since 2021, because last year I didn't even put that much out in October and November, or did I even at all? Just thinking about it, I actually may not have really done much at all last year. So anyway, my whole point being, I'm getting back in the swing of things. And, last year with how the team was going, and obviously wasn't going in the way that we wanted, well, I'm back now. All of that to say, 2023 here, I'm definitely putting in a lot of work right now, and hopefully y'all are enjoying. Let me get some who-dats to those who are here in the channel. Welcome in Lester, Bim, Bradley, Slade. I gotta sneeze, man. That's annoying. Hold on one second. Oh, it's stuck in my nose. That's the worst. And of course, it goes away before I even have to sneeze. Fantastic. DJ Twicker, Beacon, Steel Bill, Abraham, Tyler Guillory, Devon, Lester, Dr. Billy Oshie, one of our moderators. Good to see you. Thank you for the constant support. Solar Flares, good to see you. Reginald. So welcome in. So I guess technically I've actually already started doing more film study this year than I did last year. We'll hopefully continue on that. As long as everybody's enjoying it, I'm going to. And it's been kind of crazy because we've had just in the past 2 weeks about 500 new people join the channel. So if you're listening, do me a huge solid. Invite more people to come join, because the more people that support the channel, the more we can do. And also want to give a couple shout outs. Thank you for those 2 individuals this past week who actually donated to our channel for the film study. So thank you for supporting it and helping that happen, because I can't do it without y'all. Tonight, we're going to take a look and we're going to talk about the New Orleans Saints. We've got CJ Stroud, who is going to be starting for the Houston Texans in the final preseason game. We're going to talk about the New Orleans Saints and, different names to watch, things like that. Who all can we end up seeing play and who's actually been standing out? For example, we talked about Shaq Davis in week 2. Well, he's been having a really, really good week at practice. And depending on who you like to follow for your practice updates, whether it is Ross Jackson, our friend Ross, whether it is the NOLA football team from Brooke to Nick to Mike Triplett, whoever it is you use for your source, it's been really entertaining, really encouraging to see, but for a long time, we just haven't been able to get excited. And I don't know if that excitement is going to translate, but I will tell you That's Shaq Davis, certainly showing out to try to earn a roster spot. And the big question is going to be, are we going to have a 5-man roster for wide receiver, a 6-man roster? We have to see. We also have the news of Kai Harley. Congratulations here from the channel to Kai Harley, who has been made the assistant general manager. And hopefully that keeps him here. And I actually believe, it's just my personal thought, I really am believing that we're going to see him become the number one, the de facto GM. And he's going to replace Mickey Loomis in the next couple of years. That's what I honestly think. And I think that's a great thing for New Orleans. I think it's a great thing for New Orleans. And I hope that it stays the same. But we're going to keep on going through it. Good news here from the injury front. I just gave you an injury update here 2 days ago. Rashid Shaheed returned to practice and is doing individual drills. Marshawn Lattimore is participating in practice, been doing individual drills. So for those who are curious, wanting an update on some injuries, there's just some big injuries. Having Rashid Shaheed starting to work back is absolutely huge. I mean, we'd love to have him back at the beginning of the season. Obviously, when you're missing guys like Alvin Kamara and big playmakers, you need to have others that can fill in the role. Obviously, different position. Not trying to say that Rashid Shaheed as a slot guy is the exact same thing as Alvin Kamara at running back. But what I am saying is the ability to contribute on the field is pretty big. So having Shaheed coming back, and now we can talk about the need for speed and the need for Shaheed, is a good position to be in. Good to see him back practicing with the team. Michael Thomas also apparently is getting better. Nick Underhill, I know earlier this morning, was talking about in the team drills and during the 11-on-11s and 7-on-7s, we had Michael Thomas have his best day of camp in terms of dominating the defense, called every pass on his way, and won all of his individual drills, which is exciting to see. So between seeing Marshawn Lattimore's knee not having any structural damage, just simply healing, we got some really good news for the Saints leading into this last preseason game. And then, of course, we'll have week 1 preparing. But in terms of who to start looking for, let's start talking. I obviously want to pull from chat Thursday nights especially. I love pulling from all of our supporters and all those who come to the show live and getting their thoughts. But we need to start talking about who do we think and who do we want to look at for making that last end of the roster. We just mentioned Shaq Davis quite a bit. If the New Orleans Saints were to keep 5 wide receivers, I've said that I believe Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed are the top 3. But when you get behind that, now it becomes a real big question of, okay, well, who's next? Like, who else, right? And you look at guys like A.T. Perry, who, for me, is making this roster, but you also have Kawan Baker, who really started off the preseason strong. I wouldn't say they had a bad week 2. He just wasn't the standout guy, especially on special teams. In fact, didn't take a special team snap in week 2 that I recall, though I'd have to look into our NFL Jesus and recheck. But then you had Shaq Davis getting those opportunities and those snaps, and he's definitely stepped up in a positive way. You definitely have the veterans of Traquan Smith and Keith Kirkwood. And I know every time I mention the name Traquan Smith, every Saints fan just jumps up and down in excitement, the fact that we're mentioning Traquan Smith. Yeah, if you don't love Traquan Smith, obviously you have not been a Saints fan any recent amount of time. He's clearly the best in the future. So you've got still 10 names of wide receivers that are on this roster. Who all is actually going to end up making it is becoming a more and more pressing question. If you keep 5, I think it's really tough. If they make room for 6, this becomes an easier discussion to have. And the reason I think that is so, with 6, you can then take Thomas Olave Shaheed, but you can also keep A.T. Perry, Shaq Davis, who has really good size. I wouldn't say that he's an incredible size athlete. Like, he's not Calvin Johnson. He's not Megatron. But he's got good size. I like his height, weight, speed combination. That's a 3-pronged attack at wide receiver you're always talking about. I think he's developing as a route runner. And then that also leaves room for another young guy in Kawan Baker. So as a whole, those are 6 that I could easily lay. It's when you knock it down to 5, that it gets a little bit more difficult. And I'm very curious to see what New Orleans ends up going with that. Lesser brings up A.T., who I think A.T. Perry should make it. I would, I don't want to use the word that I'd be shocked if he didn't. I'm just simply saying that I believe A.T. Perry has been my favorite wide receiver of this offseason that isn't one of the big 3. But he also brings up a name that we haven't talked about a ton in Bowden. Now, I know others have talked about him, so I can't sit here and say that he's not been talked about at all, but I've not talked about Bowden, I would say pretty much nil, right? And then you've also got on the other side his, like, I don't want to call him a namesake, but The other side of the field, safety position, you've also got Jordan Howden. And how is he looks? You got Lynn Bowden and Jordan Howden. Just to give you two names that are similar, but both are names that have made a positive impression. I would argue that Howden has made a more positive impression than Bowden, but I don't think that Bowden had a bad impression. I'm not saying that he's looked bad at all. And these are other names that are fighting for those bottom end roster spots, and these are going to be really key to see how many snaps they get and how they look in those snaps. So, for example, Bowden, we talk about Shaq Davis having a game. Well, Bowden had 30 snaps in the preseason week 2 game. I remember looking at him on tape and trying to see how is he going to earn him a spot. Now, he did have 2 big catches, maybe with a big 32-yarder, and he didn't have the same level of big that Shaq did, because Shaq had that really big 42 at the very early steps, and he kind of really showed off early. You saw Shaq Davis and it never left your mind, but Bowden also had a couple of really nice plays and really nice catches that you want to see more from him. And then Amuse Batman, of course, comes in and says, don't disrespect Keith Kirkwood. And y'all know that it's not I never want to insult any of these amazing Saints players. I'm just simply trying to keep it real. And I'm simply saying it's tough of where you're at. And these couple of weeks that we have left before we get into the regular season, and it's crazy to think how close we're actually getting, y'all. I mean, we're in the preseason right now, but you go to week 1. Think about this, y'all. September 10th is not that far away. Now, it feels like it because we're back into football, but we're not all the way back into football. But think about it, that is 2-ish weeks away. I mean, kind of like 3-ish weeks away, 2.5. I mean, so let's call it a conservative 2.5 weeks away. That is not much time for a player who's left to make the impression needed to secure the roster. And that doesn't include the fact that the cuts are before that, right? Cuts are before them. So you have a very limited amount of time to make that last-minute impression that earns you a roster spot on this team. So all these names that we're mentioning are definitely ones that you have got to put a lot of thought into. And that's why I'm looking at these. We're going to have our 53-man roster prediction episode, by the way, next week. So for those who are curious when that's going to be, we're going to have that episode Tuesday. We can do that live, and we can sit here and discuss that. But until they actually expand this 53-man rosters, these decisions get so difficult and so hard to say specifically what's going to happen, right? And I think it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. So we got those names, and there's even more that we're going to talk about today. And this is why it becomes so important for this 3rd preseason game. Remember, September 10th is right around the corner, y'all. 2.5 weeks is not far away. And then this upcoming weekend, you've got our final one. And it's in New Orleans, by the way. 3 days away from the airing and the recording of this podcast. 3 days away, we've got our final preseason game. And then you have that bye week, essentially, before the season starts. So we're going to talk about some matchups now. Now, I'm not interested about matchups as much as I am names. I do want to see more of Shaq Davis. I want to see more of Kwan Baker, Lynn Bowden. I am curious if Keith Kirkwood has enough to make this roster. One thing that he has over everybody from the young guys that we're bringing out is as a blocker. Look, I love A.T. Perry. I have been really impressed with A.T. Perry as a receiver, as a young guy. Now, if he was having to be the number 1 receiver, I think he would look terrible. I'm just being honest. I don't think that he can line up against the top corners in the league and look good. I don't think he's there yet, but I've loved what I've seen so far. And you can tell that there's some great traits in him, and we did a film study on him, and hopefully y'all saw a lot of those positive traits. But he also is absolutely terrible at blocking. I mean, to the point where you basically just line him 7-9 yards out and tell him to run clear routes. And we know, and I'm not trying to say this in like a he shouldn't make the roster way. I'm simply saying that we know that this team, outside zone running team that'll do everything from crap blocks to actually having a wide receiver line in the slot at a close split so that they can be a more effective blocker. We know that that is something that they want a guy to do. Hell, it's one of the things that Traquan Smith has done so well for so long, and I'm not trying to make the argument that Traquan should make this team, because I do think that New Orleans is at a point where they need to focus more on playmakers than play bodies who are just coming out there to block. You do have to do it, right? And AT is simply not at that spot yet. I think with time, he's going to get better at that. I think that's definitely something this team focuses on, and I'm not necessarily worried about it. But I do think that it is something that is probably going to open up a spot for a veteran to have that opportunity. I think that's where Keith Kirkwood maybe comes in. I'm not saying that Traquan Smith's out of it. I know every Saints fan that kind of attends my podcast, attends Ross's podcast, heads over to the NOLA football forums. Everybody that I've seen kind of wants Traquan to be gone. And I get that. I'm simply saying, I don't know if that's going to happen, but at the same time, if I'm going to give a veteran spot, I'd rather give it to Keith Kirkwood. Now, everybody else is allowed to give their opinions, and I'm here for it. So your thoughts are welcome. I do see Angel. I think one other person has mentioned Nico Lalos. I'm kind of torn on it. I want to see more of Nico Lalos, but I'll say this. Of all the players we're talking about being kind of those fringe roster spots, Nico Lalos is not on my roster. He's just not. That doesn't mean he can't be, but he's not on my roster right now. And I want to see more from him. The reason that I don't have the same level of like hightail excitement that I know a lot of people have is because I know a lot of people saw the box score, and the box score got a lot of people excited about him. But if y'all know the trend here, and maybe it's to a fault, I don't box score scout. I just don't. I think that the box score is extremely useful to give you a notice and say, hey, you really need to focus in on this player and see if what you're seeing on the stat sheet backs it up. And the truth is, when I watched the defensive line in the second game of preseason, Nico Lalos going against a lot of guys who aren't going to make the roster didn't stand out in a way that made me think, hey, this guy needs to be on the 53. Did it stand out enough for me to go, I want to see more? Absolutely. But it's like I talked about in the Discord. I think the biggest thing from him, and this is also kind of the same argument I have with other veteran players, Nico's not new to the league, right? For those that don't know, and I'm not trying to hold this to a fault, this simply means that I'm not going to take that 1 second half, mostly, explosion to an immediate start. But Nico's been in the league for 3 years. Nico actually got his first time in the league in 2020 with the New York Giants and played in 6 games, even recorded an interception, by the way. And then he did not play in another NFL game, but he has been on the practice squad. So he was with New York in 2021. He was with New York in 2022. And then he was with New Orleans in 2022 after the Giants waived him, and he was on our practice squad all of last year. So this is a guy that's been in a while. And the whole point I'm making is I want to see what I really want to see. If I got to choose, I would want Lalos to be as close to the starting lineup as possible in game 3. Now, with it being the last time that you can have the starters together, I want to see the starters in game 3, obviously. But what I'm saying is I don't want Lalos to be buried at the bottom of the game 3 depth chart. I want him to be higher to get to see him against the most NFL-ready competition that I can, at least against guys that we know will be backups in the NFL, to see where he's at. Because I do believe that having been in the league since 2020, that is 3 full years of NFL training, whether it's you were talking about defensive line coaching, just playing with other NFL players. I think that gives him a little bit of a leg up compared to rookies who've not had that level of experience. So I want to see him go against those guys and show that it wasn't just a flash in the pan. But I also don't even have him on my roster yet based on that alone, but I do have him on my practice squad. So these are all things that I want to really see and I'm excited to see. Hopefully get more opportunity of so that we can continue to move at that next step. And one thing about like a Nico type of a player, and this also goes the same FYI for guys like Lynn Bowden and Shaq Davis, with him not being a drafted guy and not having the same level of traits coming into the league that are draftable qualities. I mean, there's a reason that a guy goes in the 2nd round. There's a reason that goes in the 1st round, 3rd round, etc. And even if we want to argue reach or not, there is an art form to player evaluation and scouting, and I'm not saying that it is a perfect art form because it's certainly not. But there definitely is a reason that a lot of things happen, which means that there is an expectation and there is a value perceived on certain players. So, like, even if you look at Isaiah and you go, look, I'm hopeful for 55, but he's definitely a project. He's not ready this year. Like, if you came to that conclusion, you cannot try to slip him to the practice squad. A 2nd round pick, rookie, with the traits that he has and the potential that he has is going to get snatched. So the difficulty that presents is he eats up a roster spot no matter what. Even if he doesn't contribute this year, and even if he is, God forbid, like Peyton Turner was last year, a healthy scratch on game day, you simply cannot risk trying to move him. But you can make that risk with a Lynn Bowden, with a Shaq Davis, with a Nico Lalos. So that's another thing that you have as an issue, I guess, is a tougher burden to make a roster if you're a guy like Nico and you're a guy like some of these wide receivers and other players we're going to talk about tonight, is your perceived value is lower, thus it's easier to stash you. Now, that doesn't guarantee it. It's actually, we've seen plenty of New Orleans Saints guys try to get stashed and they're gone, right? But we'll just have to wait and see as it continues. But I want to see more. I'm excited to see more. And again, I want to see guys like this get more early reps to get more evaluation. Tron says, who you got, Shaq Davis or A.T. Perry? If I had to pick between the two right now, it's not even close, A.T. Perry. And that's not meant as an offense to Shaq. A.T. Perry has simply been the better, not only receiver in 2 games, but also in practice. But again, we're talking about 2 guys who neither are ready to be number 1 on the roster either. I mean, neither are going to line up as a split end, start right now, and look great. That's okay. I love what we can see from them. And obviously, they need to put in more tape. Definitely put in more tape. But let's grab some other names real quick. Let's grab some other names. Tron says, because both are dogs. Again, you made me choose, right? Like, you made me take a pick. A.T. Perry, who has looked better. But I do like Shaq, right? Like, I think that Shaq Davis has given enough film early on to make you at least intrigued. He hasn't given enough for me to go, hey, select him or anything, put him on the 53, but he's definitely given enough to say, look, you need to get more from him. He's 6'5", 215, big body, great wingspan, and has some really good plays. But you've also got to look deeper into it. And this is also why I enjoy the film study process that we do so much and why I love putting film out so that y'all can enjoy it, because it sucks that, and I went and did this today. I went actually through YouTube and I tried to look for other Saints guys who were doing film studies. And I'm not knocking anybody else who's trying to do what I've done for years. Please be very clear. There are multiple other people who are doing that. Shout out to them. I actually love it. I've been a firm believer for a long time that people need to have competition. And even beyond the competition aspect, more is better. That we don't take away from each other, we build each other up. I used to tell Nick Underhill years ago, dude, you need to start using YouTube and podcasting as a better outlet. And I'm not saying that I'm the reason he did. I'm simply saying that, this is something that I've always encouraged, that us as a Who Dat Nation need to grow. More analysts are better analysts. More scouts are better scouts. More podcasters are better podcasters. So all that to say, like, if you look around YouTube right now and you look around who's doing film studies, you don't really have anybody going through the level of depth and training that I have. Now, again, that is not to put me on a pedestal, because real quick, let me give some shout outs. I'll be very clear. This is not a Rev Deuce is better than everybody else in the Saints scene, because Nick Underhill has gone through the scouting academy and did it before me. Matty Hudak has gone through the scouting academy. And in my opinion, because I sit down, and even though I helped train Matty at the very beginning, and she'll tell you that, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. There are things right now today, there are positions that I would say that she is more educated than me at, and at least fresher at. Actually, when we had our last film study, because me and her will sit in private and we'll do this together because iron sharpens iron, she's got a better step on safety coverage than I do right now. Straight up. All right? So, be very clear. I don't believe that I'm the end-all be-all to the world, and I can improve and get better, and I think everybody can do the same thing. So, this is why I love doing the film study process that we do on YouTube, because I actually am giving y'all the plays to see from every angle that you need to try to make an opinion for yourself. Even if you watch my film studies and disagree. If you go watch that Peyton Turner film study that I just released and say, look, I watched what Rev's put out, and I think he's trash. I'm fine with that if you watch the tape, and that's what you came to the conclusion of. You said, look, it's year 3, he should be way past this, and you hate him. Whatever. Make him your next sacrificial lamb. I'm not going to fuss about it. But I do like to have more options, and the more that you can actually review, the better it ends up being. Anyway, that's my personal take. I know I got kind of long-winded and a little bit out of it. I wasn't trying to get kind of too crazy or anything, but I do really feel that there are different ways to evaluate. There's definitely different ways to feed in your New Orleans Saints media, and I am glad that we're kind of having an expansive group here. Like, it's more than it used to be. I mean, 6 years ago, we did not have the level of coverage that we do now, whether it's podcasting, writing, etc. I just love where it's got. And I also love to see, because we're just talking about these players, like I've loved, if I had to pick a guy that's been my favorite to watch that is not one of the mainstream players, has been A.T. Perry. Truthfully. It's just, you can see so many things trait-wise in A.T. Perry that can really, if they get refined. And it's little things. Like when I watch A.T. Perry coming out of his break, sometimes he's a little bit choppy and laggy, where if he just quickens up a little bit better, it's, he shows effort in blocking. It's just not all there. Like, he's not able to truly redirect guys and lock them out like you'll see, Brandon Coleman used to do when he was an effective, rotational player, or Traquan did. But you can see that it's going to get there. You're going to see it's going to get there, right? And it's just hoping that it gets there sooner rather than later. But I've really enjoyed, and I'd probably say AT's been my favorite. Now there are other guys. If you talk about like starters, man, Malcolm Roach is a rotational backup, like a guy that we know is going to make the roster. Malcolm Roach has like really stood out as he looks like he's gotten better this year compared to last year. Kalen Saunders, I knew he was going to be great. That's why I put out a film study 5 months ago, and everything that we've seen in the preseason has confirmed that. I only hope that he stays healthy and he carries that into the regular season. This might be the most fun I've had doing one tech film study in years, because that's how much Kalen Saunders looks when he's got here in New Orleans. I've enjoyed that. I've even enjoyed studying Michael Thomas, so I want more from him. So all of these are great things to do, and now we just got to see who's going to make that. And let's just keep moving on the offensive side when it comes to the bottom of the roster. I would say the least impressed has been offensive line depth. Now, that doesn't mean I think that the offensive line has been terrible from the backup perspective. I would say that the broadcast view is a little unfair at times to offensive line and even to quarterbacks. And that's me actually saying a little bit unfair to Jameis Winston sometimes, honestly, because truthfully, I'm hyping up some of these young receivers, but when we talk about, Jameis Winston holds the ball too long, or this offensive line is giving up sacks, to be honest, a lot of times the wide receivers just aren't open. In fact, I actually covered a couple plays, and I was talking to another podcast host. I don't know how many of y'all listen to other Saints podcasts, but one of the ones that I like is, I call it the Twitter block pod now, but, Ryan. And I was talking to him about a couple of the players, and we were just saying, like, look, I love A.T. Perry, and I just spent time hyping up A.T. So let me go ahead and, I don't want to use the word backtrack it right now, but let me give you a dose of truth and reality real quick. There are issues with some of his timing and his route running. And a couple of those instances were against the Chargers, where he was running things like out routes, but we're talking about the breaks being 12, 15 yards downfield, where Jameis Winston would hit his drop. And it's not just about how you run a route. It's also about how quickly you get into it and then break into the, whether you're going to make a move at the stem, or you're going to break into, just put it this way, getting open and reading the zone, or beating your man, how you get into your separation. And he'd be late by a full second, right? So these are things that he's got to improve on, because not only was he late, he also ran into other routes, as in there was overlapping routes between wide receivers. And generally speaking, just an FYI, if you see two receivers in the same spot, somebody did their job wrong, or somebody didn't do their job well. And those are things that he's got to improve on. But when I watch the offensive line, it's tough to get excited about Max Garcia, even though he's a veteran. I do like that we've got him. I'm curious to see how the Andres Pete and James Hurst thing works out at left guard. Andres Pete, by the way, healthier now, practicing now. Probably going to see him in 3 days. I know he's been a name that not a lot of people like to get excited about, but talk about it. And honestly, if Andres Pete is healthy, Dr. Billy Oshie, please don't start one of your rants. You can tell I've had some of my followers on the podcast for a long time. I already know. Regardless of whether Hurst or Pete starts, either way, if both are healthy, that is much better depth than what you've seen. Like, I have loved Saldivari, and I've hyped up Saldivari as somebody that I really want to be the future at left guard. Because obviously, John Hurst or James Hurst, and Andres Pete aren't young guys anyway. He's not looked enough to where I'd want him to be starting this year, and I think that he has to develop. But I knew that when they drafted him. I was really excited about them drafting him, but I knew that he was going to need that time. And I'm also extremely concerned, truthfully, about the tackle position as a backup. Like, when I watch Landon Young, when I watch Storm Norton had a lot of penalty issues here in this preseason so far. When I look at Lewis Kidd, I do not look confident if something were to happen to Ryan Ramczyk or Trevor Penning. And so when we're talking about guys who are going to make the roster, those are also an area that I say, look, they have got to step up. They have got to show something better, because that is probably the one area that I would say has looked the worst. And I hate to, I don't like being negative, y'all. I just don't. I feel like I'm not a very negative person. I try to be a very positive person, but I also try to be pragmatic. And I just think that has probably been the worst positional group that we've seen. And hopefully that changes, though, right? Like, the more time these guys have to train, perfect their craft, and get better, you can see improvement. So now Billy O says, I feel like Hurst is better for pinning. And I would say that there's definitely been a lot of really good reps between those two playing together, right? And we haven't seen much pinning and Pete reps. So we'll see how that ends up playing. I'm very curious to see how it goes. I'm going to go right to chat. I know I'm throwing out a lot of names, but we're going to grab a couple of chats and see where we go. What's Shaq Davis' chances of making the roster? Gundam, great question. I know we're going to talk about a lot of offensive receiving play tonight, apparently. I would say Shaq's chances of making the roster are entirely dependent upon whether the New Orleans Saints are going to carry 6 or 5 wide receivers. Now, I could be wrong there, but I personally have witnessed more positive special team snaps from a guy like Kawan Baker than I have Shaq. And Kawan Baker has looked good on the field in both practice and camp and preseason as a receiver. Now, that is not to discount anything Shaq has done. But I'm simply saying that, like, if you are limited to 5 wide receivers right now, that's really tough because you already know who the top 3 are, and they're locked in. Like, you're not going to not have Shaheed, Olave, or Thomas unless an injury happens, and God forbid, we do not need more injuries. So that means that you got 2 spots left with 5, and you're probably going to keep one that's a veteran, and then you're probably going to keep one young guy who's looking really good who also contributes a lot in special teams, which would seem to indicate to me Keith Kirkwood and A.T. Perry. And then everybody else is out in the wash. If you keep 6, it's easier to find a spot that you're taking that spot from somewhere else. Now, that also is me personally keeping Keith Kirkwood over Traquan Smith. But we have seen for years now, and honestly, it'd be disingenuous for me to just write him off because we've looked at this staff and Sean Payton's staff, as both staffs keep Traquan Smith around as a very solid veteran that they believe they can rely on. Now, I'm not asking you who are listening to this podcast to agree or disagree with that statement. I'm simply asking you to realize that this coaching staff, this one, not even Sean Payton. We talked about how Sean Payton had his guys. Cool. Every coach has that. But this coaching staff has shown that they trust in Traquan Smith, right or wrong. So it's quite possible that he ends up being number 6 or number 5, right? So all of this has to get considered when we talk about Shaq Davis. So Shaq Davis really has to not only have had the game that he had against the Chargers, and I think that he did have some really good looks and some good reps. He also has to do it again, and he also has to have a fantastic camp. Now, good news for you who are big fans of Shaq Davis. If you follow New Orleans football, Brooke actually talked about this earlier today. He looked really good in camp today. So if he is shining and looking good, good news. That improves his chance. So these are the type of things you got to think about. It's not that I think that like Shaq Davis is a bad player. I actually have, anytime that you see a guy, have some type of a pop-off moment, especially if you talk about New Orleans where we've struggled to have those type of 40-yard plays, and you just saw him do one, like your immediate reaction goes to, got to make the roster, right? But truthfully, this is probably the toughest roster part to make. It's really difficult to make wide receiver spots right now and DB spots right now because they're both loaded with starters and guys that you believe are solid backups already. So anyway, to answer the question, way too long-winded. That's my answer. I want to see more from Shaq, and I'm hopeful that he can continue to impress. But if New Orleans chooses to keep 5 receivers, it's going to be really tough for him to be that guy. That doesn't mean that they won't keep him around, though, because I would immediately assume that he's on the practice squad. Now, last year, just to give you reference, last year New Orleans did keep 6 wide receivers, depending on when in the season you're talking about. But to remind you, let's just go into the time machine real quick to remind you of what the roster was. September 1st, 2022, Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, Jarvis Landry, Marquez Callaway, Deontay Harris / Deontay Hardy, Traquan Smith. So they did keep 6. And if that's the case, this year, Shaq Davis is your Marquez Callaway. A.T. Perry is your Marquez Callaway. Either way you want to look at it. So opportunities there based on how many they keep. Now, New Orleans has alternated how many they've kept depending on, other positions. I think this year New Orleans is definitely, or they're obviously looking at defensive line and offensive line depth more than they have in, maybe years past. Doesn't mean that that's going to be the case this year. And there's also an off chance that New Orleans keeps 7 wide receivers because they have a chance of that. But just to give you, some more back in time, let's go back to 2021. Let's go back 2 years ago. 5 wide receivers. Chris Hogan, Lil Jordan Humphrey, Ty Montgomery, Deontay Harris, Marquez Callaway, and then, of course, Michael Thomas was injured. So at that point, they just kept 5. And that was your 5, by the way. That was those were the rough days. We remember those. So that's the answer to the question. Let me move to another one before we spin here forever. King says, what players have the most to prove to make this roster? When you say most to prove, are you saying like guys who are like on the fringe in a negative way or a positive way? I guess it kind of depends on the way that you're wording that. So for me, I'm looking at guys who have been here a couple years. Can they prove that they still deserve the spot, right? Like DeMarco Jackson's in his second year, missed the first with injuries and stuff. Nephi Sewell's been here a couple years, or Nephi, since somebody wanted to correct me the other day. Yeah, I just like saying names how I like to say them, but since somebody corrected me, I guess I need to at least prove that I can do it. Are they on the fringe? Are they going to get moved because of guys like Anthony Orji, who's, in my opinion, had a really, really good camp, or guys like Jalen Smith, who's come in and are look good because they're not getting rid of Zach Bond. So which way do you kind of mean it, King? I guess is my question. Who are the linebackers you see making it? Since we're here, we might as well talk about it. Billy, good to see you. I mean, Tuesday, we're going to focus the most on the 53. That's when I'm going to do it because that's going to put us right before our cut. We're going to do our roster predictions. We're going to do our roster predictions as a group. I'm going to give you mine. And then Tuesday, we'll go over what y'all think about it. Y'all can eviscerate me and tell me I'm an idiot. I'm cool for it. I'm happy to do it. We're going to have fun with it. But I don't expect New Orleans to keep more than 5 linebackers. And that's kind of what they've done historically. So 5 linebackers is kind of my number. And if we're going with 5 linebackers, and this goes why I want to see these guys against the Texans. Because Jalen Smith is not solid on my roster yet, FYI. I know people get shocked when they hear that. But I'm just being honest. He's not a guaranteed roster spot for me right now. I'm not even trying to say that in a negative way. But one preseason game of 25 snaps is not enough to prove that he's ready to be a consistent contributor on this team. And there are still, for me, extreme concerns about his injury history. Because I know for a fact, I can't say this for a fact, but I feel very strongly that if something were to happen injury-wise, Jalen Smith could not come in and be a 17-game, 60-snap-a-game player. He simply could not do that. The dude's got nerve damage in his leg and stuff. Can he contribute from a rotational standpoint? Absolutely. There's a huge difference between you being a 15 to 20 snap rotational linebacker and being a 60 snap starter for 4 months in an NFL system. Right? So when I look at the 5 right now, the guys who I feel like need to put out the most film, because I feel like Pete Warner, Demario Davis, and Zach Bond are locked. Again, you can go back to the whole Zach Bond thing. Do we agree, disagree? Y'all take that up with DA, right? So that means you got 2 spots. And then you've got DeMarco Jackson, who I've actually liked. Like, I've liked DeMarco Jackson. Now, is he amazing? I wouldn't say that he's had the best camp of all the linebackers. I wouldn't. I feel like that'd be unfair of me to say. So I don't feel like he's had the best position. But we've also got Nephi Sewell. I'm calling him Nephi because I just think it's a cooler nickname. Nephi Sewell. You've got Jalen Smith, who we just kind of talked about. You got Ty Summers, who I feel like has had some really good initial snaps. Nick Anderson, the Tulane rookie. I think he's more practice squad material, but he has had some special teams reps and things like that. Anthony Orji, who we've talked a lot about, having some real pop-up plays that we've liked. I just rattled off, 6 names for 2 spots. And this is why that 3rd week, this upcoming Sunday, is so important, right? That's so important. And we'll go from there. But, as I see it right now, the 2 that I would pencil in would probably be Orji and Summers. Maybe Orji and Sewell. Now, can Jalen take that for me in the next 3 days? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not going to have a guy come in, play 25 snaps against backups, and I give him a spot of him seeing a significant time. I just want to make sure he's healthy, make sure he is actually fitting, make sure it wasn't just a flash in a pan. see more reps, and then he'll be on mine. And then that means I've only got one spot left. So I think linebacker, tough. Now, I don't think that the linebackers are as good as, the starter level, but in terms of fighting for the backups, you got some really good names. I really hope they get to retain a lot of them in the practice squad. Shout out to Charles. Good to see you, man. It's 22 for 22. Glad to see a game out here. We definitely hit the hurricane on the way back to San Diego. Glad to hear Graham is better and making plays, which, by the way, thank you for mentioning that. We haven't mentioned him yet, but Jimmy Graham back at practice, looking good. Says, hope Foskey can make plays against the Texans. Who dat and God bless. I'm very curious to see if he has a stand-up game because talking about defensive ends, usually you keep about 5 defensive ends, and I don't see him not making the roster, so that means he kind of has to have some good plays, right? And thank you so much for supporting, Charles. I really do appreciate it. Not required, but for those curious, for me to make film studies and do the work that I do, people like Charles are incredible to me because I can't do it without them. So a huge thank you, a big, honest, sincere thank you. I really do appreciate that. If you do want to contribute to the channel so I can make more film studies, do the podcast, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, or check out our website, revduce.com. Charles, I'm right there with you. And if y'all watch my Isaiah and Peyton film study from yesterday, I do hope that y'all leave that film study going. It wasn't as bad as social media makes it out to be. I truly, truly hope that when y'all watch that film study, because that's what I left it with. I left it going, man, I wish Peyton Turner was more consistent, but I also didn't hate Turner's film. And I also left it going, Isaiah wasn't as bad as the offseason media train is making it seem. Now, at the same time, Isaiah wasn't great. And there's a reason that DA was chewing his butt out on the sidelines at various points. Again, I'm not saying anything too positive or too negative, and I'm not trying to just ride the middle. But I do need to see him continue to progress and grow because just like I talked about there being the ability to kind of stash a guy, there's an expectation if you're on the roster that you help, right? If you're on the roster, you're expected to contribute. Well, you can't just try to store your second-round pick. It's the same problem that you had with Peyton Turner last year. Peyton Turner clearly wasn't playing super well. He's a healthy scratch as a first-round pick, but you can't risk putting him down somewhere. Somebody's going to pick him up. It's the same thing with Isaiah. If you try to stash Isaiah, he's gone. Absolutely no shot. So you hope to see him progress quicker than any other guy, right? You want him to look better, and you want him to look better faster than Nico Lalos, right? You want him to look better than, Prince Emili or Kyle Phillips. Well, I think Kyle Phillips has had some good reps in this camp time, and you look at guys like Jack Heflin. These are all players who I don't think make the roster, by the way, but still have to be mentioned. If I had to just go ahead and talk preliminary 53-man roster, I think your 5 defensive ends are Tano Passignon, Cameron Jordan, Carl Granderson, Peyton Turner, and then Isaiah. And I don't think there's any other defensive end that makes the roster besides those 5. It is possible, but if you've ever done this as a project, you can sit here in the chat, or if you're listening in your car, you can acknowledge it is extremely hard to put together a 53-man roster because you think that's a lot of spots until you actually start doing it and you go, holy crap, who am I leaving off the list? And this happens to me even in years where I don't feel like the team is deep. And this is a year I do feel like we finally have a little bit of depth in certain positions, right? So if you keep defensive linemen as a total, all the defensive linemen is usually 9 to 10 players. You think about it. Well, you just got rid of 1/5 of those 53 spots in 2 positions. Done. It evaporates very quickly. Because on the defensive tackle side, you've got Saunders, who I'm extremely hype about. You've got the rookie Breezy, who has had some good reps, by the way. So those are 2 guaranteed locks. Then you got Malcolm Roach, who if the New Orleans Saints don't keep Malcolm Roach, something's wrong. That dude has looked extremely good, in my opinion, for a rotational player. Then you got Nate Shepard, who has also had some good reps and has been a rotational guy. I actually don't think that he ends up being the starter by the end of the year, but I think he's starting on the roster. And that's 4 names right there. So even if you like Prince Emili or you like Jack Heflin or you like Jaron Cage, you're hoping New Orleans keeps 5 defensive tackles to keep one of those guys. And there's no guarantee they do that because what if they say, hey, look, we really do have 6 linebackers that we want to keep, and they're going to hold off an offensive or defensive line spot to keep an extra linebacker. But hey, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We haven't even talked about DB, which could be the deepest room there is. So anyway, this is why the exercise is so difficult and why we're going to spend an entire episode on Tuesday discussing that after the preseason game and after we get a little bit of film in. Because speaking of that DB room, people that I'm looking at, Jonathan Abrams, like the veteran. Does Jonathan Abrams stay on this team? Jordan Howden, who I know a lot of people have mentioned. Smoke Monday, who, Honey Badger has really loved on for 2 years. Who's going to make that DB room? I would say that I haven't been really, I wouldn't use the word impressed with like Pride, Troy Pride, but I would say that Ugo Amadi has given some damn good reasons why he should be considered for the roster. And what's wild is you're talking about him being like that nickel guy. Okay. Everybody in chat can rattle off 4 corners right now that they would not let the Saints get rid of immediately. Y'all know who the 4 are. Do you keep 5? Do you keep 6? Because that means guys like Amadi have got to find a spot, but that also means, like, what about Lonnie Johnson? And this is why this game 3 is going to be so big, because there's a lot of names that who's going to make it? Who's going to make it? So, wow. And by the way, Amused Batman brings up a good point. You've also got your safety in Marcus May, who finally has gotten a judgment on that DUI from 2 years ago, which means he's going to miss probably 3 or 4 games. So you got to have somebody, and you definitely don't want to risk the person that will end up having a lot of his reps, try to stash him on the practice squad. And also, just to bring this up for Tuesday's fun and hilarity, you've also got to consider that you have an entire pro personnel scouting department that at this time of year, they're looking around the other NFL teams for guys that are going to get cut that might be better than some of the people that we have here. So this is also why, like, when I do play Madden, and by the way, shout out, somebody said that they were going to get me Madden at their next paycheck. So shout out to them if they get me Madden. I appreciate that. But this is why, like, when I do play Madden, my favorite part is off-season and training camp. Like, I'm not saying that I don't enjoy playing the game like week 7. I'm just simply saying, like, the fun part for me is the draft, the scouting, the signing, the re-signing, going through the training camp and having 90 people and then cutting it down. I enjoy that. But I'm also a little bit of a goofball and a little bit of a weirdo because I'm obsessed with football 24/7, all for a sport that plays 17 regular season games. So, Ted says, does A.T. Perry make the cut? I would be shocked if he doesn't. I mean, he would just have to get severely outshined. I think that he's just had too good of an offseason to not have him on the roster. That's my opinion. But, I mean, he can't come out against the Texans and just, like, have gone backwards, right? He can't come out and all of his routes are terrible suddenly. I mean, he's got to continue to look good. Can we just go for it in every 4th round and not carry a punter? Every 4th down and not carry a punter? I mean, you could. I wouldn't do that, but you could. And honestly, Jordy, you give me the vibes that you're one of those like analytics nerds who are trying to ruin football by getting rid of our extra points and always going for 2. And you're trying to get rid of punts and the sanctity of the game. I'm just kidding, man. But I mean, yeah, you could. There's nobody been willing to have the balls to do it yet. Nobody's been willing to have the balls to do it yet. But is there an argument to be made for it? There truly is. There truly is an argument to be made for that. Now, we'll also add real quick, let me get this off, Jordy, that there is value in a punter who can flip field position. And the analytics back this up for all the nerds out there who are getting ready to jump out of their seats. There are analytics to back up that a punter who can consistently pin a team inside the 20, but specifically inside the 10, has extreme value. Now, you can't measure a punter by EPA, expected points added, but you can measure in field position. And that is a legitimate analytically backed weapon. There are statistics to show that the difficulty of scoring significantly magnifies when you go from having to travel 60 yards down the field to 80, 85, 90 yards down the field. So I would say that, yeah, there are definitely instances where I believe that football teams need to go for 4th down a lot more than they do. Like, truthfully, if you are within the 50-yard line, you should never punt, ever. Unless you are like, there's 2 minutes in the game, you've got a 3-point lead, and you don't want to, blow it up. But truthfully, if you're on the 45-yard line and you don't trust your kicker to make a 63, you should be going for fourth, not punting. But there are still teams in today's NFL that will punt the ball at the opponent's 45 and try to pin them inside the 10. You should absolutely, the math doesn't lie, in my opinion, go for it. If you're right at the 50 and it's the middle of the third quarter, you should go for it. Now, I guess there's an argument to also be made. There's always context. Context is always important. If you have an atrocious defense, like just to kind of like rail on Jordy here real quick, if Jordy is saying that the Saints should get rid of a punter and they've got the 2012 Saints defense, never listen to what Jordy says ever again in his life. Like, he's now banned for the entire future decades of having an opinion. But I don't think that's what he's saying. When you do have a good defense, like New Orleans does, when you do have an offense that's hopefully improved, you should take those risks. And there is truth to this fact that y'all, okay, let's put it this way. All y'all who listen to the podcast, most of y'all watch the film studies, right? Raise your hand in the chat, drop an emote, say something if you watch the film studies. One thing that y'all can attest that I talk about all the time, whether it's offense or defense, depending on what we're talking about, especially my O-line, D-line play, because it is my favorite, is aggression. There is an effect to simply being aggressive with what you're doing versus being more passive. Simply being aggressive gives you a better chance of succeeding versus your opponent. Just the simple act of being more violent, that matters. And that should come into play calling as well. I'm a firm believer that more aggressive play callers on offense or defense are the better ones. Now, that does mean they will burn you, okay? Real quick. Let's not act like there aren't risks here. You will get burned. But I remember years ago, remember the Patriots and the Indianapolis Colts having like that rivalry? Y'all remember that? It was a big deal. It was Manning. It was Brady. Remember when they went for it on like their own 30-yard line? That level of aggression? I'm not saying the play didn't work to their advantage. It went terrible. But was it the right call? I'll say this. That level of aggression is why both of those teams were consistent Super Bowl contenders. Not only were the players that level of aggressive, but the coaches were willing to take those level of risk. Now, there are individual aggressive plays that end up being stupid. But prime Sean Payton in New Orleans was the same way. This was a man who would call double reverses for no damn reason to be aggressive. This man had Willie Snead throwing passes at least twice a year. Flea flickers for no reason. Because aggression gives you a better chance of winning. So, anyway, we got completely distracted thanks to Jordy. I do think that there's an argument that if you want New Orleans to be better, I would love Pete Carmichael to be more aggressive. 50-yard line, it's 4th and 7. Go for it. How about this? 4th and 7. Yo, looking at you, Michael Thomas. They going to call you slant boy? Cool. Live up to your damn name. 4th and 7. Convert it. I want you to get to the 43-yard line. Do it. They're going to call you slant boy. At least be it. Dominate it. Do it. I'm here for it. Renegotiate your whole Nike contract. All because of that. Do it. Own it. Be it. Dominate it. Aggression. Now I'm just saying words. Aren't y'all glad I'm fluent in English? Look at me using words. Cool. So, yeah, I love that. And I think that hopefully Pete gets to that point where they trust the team to have those moments. You know, and that's not to say anything negative about Will Lutz, who has looked better. He has looked better, like this camp, etc., than he did last year. Hopefully he is truly a fully healthy player now. But yeah, I would actually love more aggression. And honestly, I'll be real. Look, that's going to bite us in the butt some. If you do become an extremely aggressive team with some of your play calling, you're going to mess up and you're probably going to lose a game. But I think that there's a reason that we associate 2009. We always think ambush. And we just do. Like that's the big play of 2009. I'm not saying there weren't other great plays. Robert Meacham, Drew Brees throws a stupid interception, being aggressive. And Robert Meacham goes and strips the ball and runs it back against Washington. It's a great play, right? Mike McKenzie coming back, making plays. It's fantastic. Tracy Porter picking off Brett Favre. Incredible. But honestly, the play that dominates 2009 is ambush. It has a freaking name. I mean, aggression. Anyway, we got really rabbit trailed at the end of the podcast. I guess it's something that y'all love or hate about my podcast, but we do that a lot, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. But we got to wrap because we're going to be back following this game on Sunday, and then I'm going to have 2 weeks of content. We're going to be pumping out film studies. So I hope y'all are ready. Texans game, 7 p.m. It's a late game. Damn late games. I hate these things because I'm going to be up till like 2 in the morning. 7 p.m. After the game, we will have a pod to go over instant recap. And then Tuesday, we're going to be talking who makes this roster, trying to get our predictions in. And if there's anybody out there that wants to sponsor maybe like a T-shirt and we do a giveaway to those who can guess the roster the closest, maybe we'll do something like that. Maybe we can do a giveaway if somebody wants to help host it. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show. I had a great time hanging out with y'all as I always do. Hopefully you did as well. I will be back following final preseason game 2023. We'll have some film studies out. We'll also do some film tomorrow. I honest to God don't know what it is yet, so I will try to figure that out tonight. I mean, it's not like there aren't options, but I truly don't know what film study to do for tomorrow. And like even now I'm doing the podcast, I'm just sitting there thinking in my brain, who do I cover? I mean, there's just so much. I mean, honestly, maybe I do Shaq Davis. Maybe we do Shaq because everybody's saying the man's name. Everybody's saying the man's name, so we'll figure it out. But I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you did, make sure you like the video, subscribe, check us out on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeart Radio. Hell, just listen to the podcast again in your radio. It helps us to get more people here, and the more that we have in our community, the more that we have in our family right here, the more content we can do. So I hope you enjoyed it. I will catch you on the next episode. Who dat? God bless. Deuces. That's me. Love y'all.